Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So we're on the last of the Far West 13th Child trilogy by Patricia Wrede. And in this one, well, I hate to use the term coming-of-age story because I hate it because a lot of times people use that just because, well, there's a teenager and she gets older and stuff. And they kind of use that and then don't talk about anything that actually happens in a book. But coming of age is a bit of a thing in this book in a way that it isn't in the others, because in this book, Eff is in her 20s and she's still living with her parents and she's at her sister's beck and call, and by the end of this book, she has revolutionized how people look at magic and has gotten married and is determined to return to the Far West. The thing is that a large part of the first section of this book involves Eff dealing with her sisters, with her mother, with the fact that her mother doesn't want her children to be in danger, with the fact that her sister Rennie is still reaping the punishments, I suppose one might say, of having been very, very impulsive. See, in the first book, Rennie eloped with a member of this rationalist group that I had mentioned before in previous videos, and because Brent had come back from an expedition into the West and he had saved everybody from swarming weasels, and he was good with a gun, and he was handsome and smart, and it's very clearly stated in this book that part of the reason they eloped was because it was kind of a shotgun wedding. And the thing is that because of everything that happened, Rennie wound up married to a man that perhaps she didn't know as well as she should have, that they wound up in a rationalist settlement, and Rennie didn't believe in the rationalists. She didn't want to give up magic. She didn't think it was a crutch or any of those things that the rationalists believed, but she wound up living there anyways, and she had children probably before she was ready for them, and a whole bunch of other things. And so Rennie is always just a little bit on Eff's back, on Lan's back, on her husband's back, because she knows what not thinking through can lead to. But she makes herself a little obnoxious about it. The fact that before she had run off, she had always been bossy, had always been difficult, just compounds the matter. And Eff's other older sister, who is at least present in this book, her sister Allie is, as Eff puts it, bossy in a different way, because Allie is busy telling everybody what to do, not to her own benefit, but because she thinks that's what you should do for the sake of the family. And they even have a conversation in which Eff tells her, that just because you don't want people to do something doesn't mean that they need to do what they tell you, what you tell them, and somebody has to explore the Far West, and somebody has to go out to the settlements, and you, Allie, do not get to tell people who is it that's going to get to do it. Anyways, so another Far West expedition gets announced. And that Far West expedition, which is headed by a member of the Cathayan Empire out in Ashia, so they're kind of semi-Chinese-ish. And I say that because I really don't know exactly what socio-political divisions beyond somewhere in Asia that that Patricia Wrede had, but it's very clearly Far Eastern influenced. The Cathayan Empire representative, it's partly under their auspices and with their funding. And they basically set out with sort of three groups. Associated magicians, the scientists and researchers, and the support staff / army. And what happens is that a couple of the people that they contact are Eff's friend William, who has been a very close friend of both her and Lan's ever since they first moved to Mill City. And Mill City is the frontier city that they moved to from Helvan Shores. In the first book, they were living in Helvan Shores for the first couple chapters, and then they moved to Mill City, which is kind of right next to the Great Barrier. Anyways, so the thing is that they plan to do an expedition all the way out to the Rockies because nobody has ever been that far out and lived, at least as far as they know, and because explorations have to be done. They have had more and more animals arriving in their area, arriving at the Great Barrier, at the settlements that nobody has heard of, and they're dangerous animals. They're, things like dragons, which sure they've heard of, but the so-called Medusa lizards, which turn people to stone literally, are something new and kind of terrifying. And the so-called mirror bugs, which destroyed several seasons worth of harvests and a whole lot of forest, were also kind of a problem. So they contact Lan because he's a 7, and Lan and Eff's friend William gets invited along because he had been helping one of the professors, the same African woman who had been black woman rather, who had been teaching African magics to Eff, that she was a professor at Triskelion University. I believe it's somewhere around New Orleans. And so she brings William along as her assistant, and Lan gets invited, and Brent, who was on the last expedition, gets invited. Brent eventually turns it down, but one gets the feeling that he turned it down because his wife bullied him into it. But it was partly because she wound up married to him due to a series of mistakes on her part, and frankly, it's fairly clear that she's insecure about the whole mess. Eff at first isn't expecting to get invited, but eventually she does, and it's one of the very interesting things in this book, in this whole series, is how reflective she is. The way that these books repeatedly have her saying, and I went off into a corner, someplace quiet, where I could think about this. And she says that a lot because she spends a large portion of these books thinking, which is one of the most interesting and absorbing parts of this book, to me at least, is all of this internal stuff in the book. Something that, one of the things that books excel at, that you don't get in movies, that you don't get in video games, is that you might get it in a comic book, but even so, the thing that a book really, really excels at is stopping all of the action for a moment and letting you live inside somebody's head as they think through a problem. It lets you sit there and say, what happened? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? What's going on? How am I going to approach this issue? And it's really, really one of the great strengths of this series is how much time Eff spends in her head. And it's equally interesting, of course, that it's both a strength of hers and a flaw, because it's a strength in that Eff always tries to look through and look at all the angles of a problem. It's something that's strengthened from the first book onward with Miss Ochiba, Marianne Ochiba, who is the woman who taught Eff African magics or started her on learning them, because what Miss Ochiba tells her in that first class that they meet at in the first book of the trilogy is, what's another way of looking at it? And that first class, what they do is they have an exercise where she has a painting in the classroom and she says, what is this? And they say, well, it's a picture of a river. And somebody says, well, it's a picture of this place because I know this because my father works there. And it's a picture of trees and it does this. And if there's silence when Miss Ochiba says, what else is it? And Eff says, it's a painting, because yes, it's a picture of things, but it is also a painting. And Miss Ochiba finally says, and also, snap, it's an illusion. And the painting fades away as if it wasn't never there, because it wasn't. And that lesson of finding another way to look at things runs through this whole series. And in this trek out to the far west, because Eff winds up on this expedition to the far west, she gets invited along, and one of the things that happens is that she finally meets and gets to properly talk to, a Cathayan magician. And the thing about magic in this book delineates three major schools of magic. African magic, which is described as nudging things into the path you want them to take. So, instead of making something happen, you sort of say, well, the river could sort of be nudged until it gradually changes its course that ways. Whereas Cathayan and Avrupan magics are, I'm going to make a thing happen. I am going to change the world to match what I want to happen. But while Avrupans are very, very individual, everybody does a spell on their own, and if you're doing group work, it means everybody is casting a bunch of spells all together simultaneously. Cathayan magic is a whole bunch of people get together and cast a single spell as a unit, where everybody pulls their magic and then one person sort of works with everybody else's magic to, make things happen. And each of these has a different way of approaching magic and using magic. But because Eff has had such an unusual background and approach to magic, she looks at magic as saying, this is different people doing different things with the same object. We have a pool of water and you're making an ice sculpture and you're making a dam and you're using it to water plants. Each of these is a thing you can do with magic, but it's with the water, but it's a different use of the water. And at the end of this, Eff is the one who pulls everybody down effectively into the underneath where all the magic is the same. And it's because of that she saves the day. And there's a whole bunch of other discoveries along the way, and there's a very, very minor background romance that is a little bit perfunctory, but it's perfunctory I think in a lot of ways, it's perfunctory in the way that the Harry Potter romance with Ginny is, in that William is a central character in this, but the books aren't full of the two of them in romantic clinches. It's not full of the two of them sharing googly eyes at each other. It's that they're very, very close friends, and being in this place, on this trek together, finally sort of brings them close enough, and William proposes to her, and the book ends with her saying, and we got married, and as soon as we can, we're going back out west again. And I like this trilogy, and I kind of, as much as I loved it, I hope there isn't any more, because I think it's a perfect ending. I think it wraps up perfectly, and anything else would be gilding the lily. And I have more things to say, but I'm out of my 15 minutes, so That's everything, and I'll see you all next week.